The Madman! Welcome to another card review. So first of all, we start with the cute doggo. By the way, apparently another cute doggo getting revealed on Monday's stream. But this doggo knows how to play dead. And he doesn't even have to do anything because he's already dead. I see what you did, Blizzard. That's so cute. So the card is very reminiscent of Feign Death. 2-mana trigger all death rattles. It actually compares pretty favorably to it, contrary to what people might say, because for 1 mana, there's a whole bunch of things you could trigger with the death rattle handily. A final card to compare Play Dead with is with Terrascale Stalker. For 3 mana, you can also trigger a friendly minion's death rattle. And generally, when you're comboing cards together, when you're packaging cards together, it seems like the Stalker gets the much better deal, since for 2 extra mana, you get an extra 3/3. So 2 mana 3/3 is good, so 2 mana 3/3 with the added benefit of playing dead, that seems like a winner. For Play Dead to be good over Terrascale Stalker, one of 2 things needs to happen. 1, you end up playing both of those cards in your deck, in the case of death rattles being extremely strong. Option 2, you want to play this extremely fast. You need to just have the 1 spare mana to play exactly the turn that you play Death Rattle on, so that you don't have to play the Death Rattle plus 3 mana, now you just have to do Death Rattle plus 1 mana. One of those 2 things needs to happen for Play Dead to be played. Otherwise, Play Dead will be dead. Yuck, 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 yuck. Breath of Sindragosa. 1 mana deal 2 damage effects have traditionally not been too strong, but it does come with a freeze. And freeze is pretty good. But the main problem is dealing 2 damage. If you're killing the minion, then it doesn't really matter if it's frozen, right? It seems to me like the best use for this card would be to Breath of Sindragosa something with 3 health, so it's frozen and then the next turn you can Fire Blast it. Or you can set up something like Breath of Sindragosa Fire Blast on a 4 health minion, and then next turn you Fire Blast it again. That's pretty slow. When you actually compare the card to Frostbolt, it actually starts to look a little bit good, because 1 extra mana for 1 extra damage, that's not that good a deal. The big downside though is that Frostbolt can actually go face, which ends up being really important. I think Breath of Sindragosa isn't actually going to see play. This particular mix of abilities of both dealing damage and freezing seems a bit iffy. And also, freezing and random minion don't work together that well, because usually if you want to freeze something, you want to freeze something pretty specific. Frozen Clone, new Mage Secret. Now, all Mage Secrets have to be considered pretty carefully, because right now, Secret Mage is a very, very strong deck in the meta. So any good secret would have a decent chance of making it into the deck. Also, with Glacial Mysteries, this is yet another option for Glacial Mysteries to pull 5 Mage Secrets into play from your deck. Why is Frozen Clone good compared to a card like Mirror Entity? Well, unlike Mirror Entity, you don't get the card immediately, but you get 2 copies of it into your hand, which is both good and bad because you'd rather get the card immediately into play if the opponent played a big card, but you'd much rather get 2 copies into your hand if your opponent played a small card which has Battlecry effects on it. And usually they want to test your Mirror Entity with a small card that has a Battlecry effect. The Mr. Dude Man Sir says, you also get the Battlecry value, unlike Mirror Entity. Wow, thank you very much, the Mr. Dude Man Sir. That was very insightful. You also get the Battle Cry, unlike Mirror Entity, guys. Thank you. One really common card that this card would love to copy, whereas you would hate to see with Mirror Entity, would be a card like Babbling Buck. You love getting more bucks, because spells are fun, so fun, whereas getting a 1/1 with Mirror Entity isn't that fun. Acolyte of Agony is a priest card which has people up in arms, 3 mana 3/3 lifesteal. The basic vanilla card that Blizzard is putting out and being like, alright guys, lifesteal, we think lifesteal is this good. We're gonna go ahead and put it in a class card and make the most basic form possible to push the envelope. We're not even gonna make the card neutral because it's strong enough, we think, to be a class priest card. The internet as a whole has kind of determined that this card isn't actually strong enough to be a class card. And even as a neutral card, that it would probably not see play. I'm inclined to agree with them. I think that the comparison to Earthen Ring Farseer is apt. Also, Earthen is a 3-mana 3/3 which heals for 3, doesn't have to heal you, it can heal a minion, and it's immediate. Acolyte of Agony's benefit over Earthen Ring Farseer, and there are benefits, let's not forget that, because if they can't kill it, or if they don't kill it, you have the potential to gain more than just 3 health as you attack twice. Earthen Ring Farseer is, and has been, a good tech against aggro. I can see a world in which a 3-mana 3/3 Earthen Ring Farseer soft taunt could be good, but that's just stretching a little bit too far, and I don't actually think it'll see play. I will say this, I think a 3-mana 3/4 lifesteal would have been too much, like some people suggest. Shadow Essence, a 6-mana kind of Barnes effect. Summon a 5/5 copy of a random minion in your deck. This card seems to be most obviously suited for a Death Rattle summon, because you want your copy of a random minion to have a good either on death effect or a good effect already on the board. Now the main problem with summoning a card with Death Rattle on it is this card has to be compared with Karen then. Karen is a 6-mana 4/5 which doesn't really see play right now. If Karen were a 5/5 which summoned a 4/5, would it see play? Probably. So the Death Rattle you need to get has to be at least Death Rattle summon a 4/5, which is really rough since not many Death Rattles are that good. Now there's also some other benefits, such as you can get a really high cost minion and then it's easier to resurrect it. At the end of the day, it seems like this card is just the best with exactly Obsidian Statue. Maybe we see a deck which runs only 2 Shadow Essence and 2 Obsidian Statue somehow as a deck. Maybe we see a deck with exactly Cairn and 2 Obsidian Statue and 2 Shadow Essence and N'Zoth. Oh wait, but then you can get N'Zoth. Well, never lucky, right? If that happens. Anyways, it seems like the cost to the stat ratio of this card is so low that even though you can high roll with it sometimes, it would be very difficult to make it have a practical competitive fit. Shadowreaper Anduin, a very cool Death Knight, 8 mana. Battlecry, destroy all minions with 5 or more attack. That is a serious battlecry. You're probably going to play this when your opponent has, realistically, only 1 5 or more attack minion. So basically you're paying 5 extra mana for the ability to get Shadowreaper. I mean, it's not going to even be that uncommon to hit 2 things. And if you were to hit 2 things with it, that would be basically worth like 7 mana. And then you add in the 5 armor and it's like, yeah, that's an 8 mana card by itself. But you not only get that, you get the hero ability that gets with it. Hero power, deal 2 damage. After you play a card, refresh this, you actually get a better than Shadow Form card. And Shadow Form is pretty good in the late game. Void Form is certainly going to be a good late game card as well. If we think that Shadow Word Death is 3 mana, and if we think that Shadow Form is a good card in the late game, then Shadowreaper Anduin certainly seems like a good deal. The big combo of Shadowreaper Anduin is if you get Raza off, then Void Form costing 0 mana is really insane. There's some potential infinite combos you can do, where if you cast Shadow Visions with 2 Radiant Elementals in play, and you have a Shadow Visions in your hand, after already having had the Raza effect, and yes, you can do Raza with 2 Shadow Visions in your deck, because you just have to have drawn 1, then you have your infinite damage effect. Now that seems really impractical because it's very high variance that you have a Shadow Vision still in your deck. Not to mention the fact that you have to play an 8 mana card, you have to hold 2 Radiant Elementals all the time until then. It's a lot of work. So if we pretend that that doesn't exist because that's an impractical combo, what we have is a heavy control card, which is good against other control decks, because against aggro you probably want to have the heal more in order to stabilize. We'll see if the meta is control enough to play it. One of the matchups where Shadowreaper Anduin can actually use his Battlecry to commonly destroy multiple 5 or more attack minions would be against Jade Druid. So if you want to have a priest deck demolish Jade Druid decks, you just run this card, and you also run Skulking Geist. and you crush their dreams like the Death Knight you are. That's evil. Drakkari Defender, 3 mana 2/8 taunt. We've seen that stat line before in Deathlord, and that stopped aggro pretty good. This has a slight downside, overloading for more mana than the 4 mana 7/7. 4 mana 7/7 costs a total of 6 mana. 3 mana 2/8 overload 3. I mean, that's a lot, man. It's 10 stats versus 14 stats. You can also compare this card to Feral Spirit, and 2/2/3s is more annoying to deal with than a 2/8, I would say. Overload just 2, so 1 fewer mana for 2 fewer stats. But the stats are split up into a 3 and a 3, specifically, so the opponent often has to overkill damage on it. Theoretically, this is a good aggro stopper, but it just turns out that Shaman has so many more better aggro stoppers, and even Tarkreeper. Tarkreeper, you're getting a 3/5, no overload. So for those 2 stats, you pay 3 overload. Boy, that's a rough payment. This card is basically the payday loan of Shaman, where they try to entice you by saying, hey, we're gonna give you a 2/8 for just 3 mana now. That's awesome. And then you're gonna be like, oh, yeah, 3 mana 2/8, I'll take that. And then the next day, you're paying that 100% interest, and then you're like, you know, this wasn't that good an idea. Alright, we've got another big stat minion here. A lot of people laugh at this card, but... okay, well, I'm not gonna say but. You probably can laugh at the card. Well, when you read the text, you laugh, right? Whenever this minion takes damage, discard a random card. It seems bad. People dream of the nightmare scenario where you're hit by 6/1/1 somehow, and then you discard 6 cards. But let me paint the world in which the stats on this card are actually, like, reasonable. Compare it with a card like Drakkari Fellhound. Howlfiend, realistically, you're discarding 2 or 3 cards for it. So, you get to play out this very well-statted card 1 turn earlier than Drakkari Fellhound. So, the card isn't only for the use of memery in the form of Howlfiend plus Treachery. But if you wanted to meme, Howlfiend plus Treachery is actually pretty good. And then the question is, how are you going to deal multiple 1-point damages to it? And people suggest Spreading Madness. This is all very mad, I would say, but in theory, there are good matchups for the Howlfiend plus the Treachery, plus the Spreading Madness to actually work. If you were up against something like Freeze Mage, where they don't have very many minions on the board. Rotface looks like a bad card, because it's an 8 mana 4/6. It can be compared with Confessor Paletress, though, and the comparison is actually very apt, because once Rotface has taken 1 damage, it's a 4/5, which is just like Confessor Paletress is 5/4, and you're summoning a random legendary minion either way. Confessor Paletress is basically 9 mana, because you would always play her on the same turn that you plan to use the hero power. So 7 plus 2 is 9, but you can actually play Rotface on 8. The only requirement that you have is you have a 1 durability Bloodrazor sitting around, and you would pretty much be expected to run 2 copies of Bloodrazor in any deck with Rotface in it. And that's not too far of a stretch, because Bloodrazor should be a pretty good card. So given that Confessor Paletress has seen play in control versus control matchups, Rotface, I expect, will also see some amount of play in Control Warrior matchups against other control decks. Even better if you manage to both break your Bloodrazor as well as do something like a Whirlwind or even a Sleep with the Fishes on 10 mana. Rotface can take the 1 plus the 3, that's fine. What's really cool is if you summon another Rotface and you happen to have a Whirlwind still available, then it's like every Rotface, get in here. Fallen Sun Cleric, 2 mana 2/1. Turns out that some ladies look better when they're undead. I mean, it will probably see more play than Shattered Sun Cleric. We'll start with that. Now, being a 1 health minion looks like a drastic weakness, and it is, because it can just be hero powered by a few different heroes, and it's vulnerable to 1/1s. It seems like it would get the most play in Zoo decks, which lack a good 2 mana card, and can consistently get a 1 mana card on the board. And it seems good with eggs as well, as another activator. Perhaps the stand-in for Abusive Sergeant. The card's an interesting take on a 2 mana 3/2 with an upside. And 2 mana 3/2s with an upside have sometimes been run and sometimes not been run, so we'll have to see how it pans out. Deathspeaker, 3 mana 2/4 battlecry, give a friendly minion immune this turn. Giving a friendly minion immune has some other applications than giving basically Divine Shield for 1 turn, but most of the time it's just about the same. It can be compared with Argent Protector. This one gets an extra 2 stats, in health even, just costs 1 more mana. It seems good when you curve your 2 mana minion into a Deathspeaker and then trade into your opponent's 2 mana minion. I mean, that's the nightmare of Argent Protector all the time. It is a bit worse than Argent Protector's effect in the sense that give your friendly minion immune this turn does not stick around, whereas Divine Shield does stick around if you don't trade with it immediately. So it looks like this card might have some applications in a deck that wants to control the board and will play a lot of early minions in order to try to control the board. That sounds like Zoo to me. I guess one last point I'll mention is Deathspeaker is really good on Giant Sandworm, and I guess worth mentioning, slight benefit over Divine Shield on Wind Fury, because it's immune no matter how many times or how many minions you attack into. Rattling Rascal! Hey, here's your 4 mana 7/7. So the slight downside is it's actually a 4 mana 2/2, because it has the equivalent effect of a 5/5 on your side and a 5/5 on their side. So this card's actually interesting because you're seeking a way to try to break the symmetry. And there's a few ways to do it. You can silence the Rascal, bounce the Rascal, you can treachery the Rascal. There are a few single target evolve effects such as Master of Evolution, which works especially good here, where you would end up with a 4/5, a 5/5, and a random 5-drop for 8 mana. And of course, you getting a 5/5 earlier than the opponent gets a 5/5 is really important. If you play the Rattling Rascal on an empty board, they have to basically use a spell to kill the Rascal. And that's worth it, that your opponent has to burn a spell on a 2/2. Now, the downsides are this card is very comparable to Moat Lurker. The fear of Rattling Rascal is that it's too difficult to break the symmetry on it. But if you do manage to break the symmetry on it, it's a 4 mana 7/7. And finally, we have Bone Drake. Dragon, with the death rattle of adding a random dragon to your hand. Now I took the opportunity to look through the dragons, and a random dragon typically is a late game card. So this is a late game value card. I was evaluating the card on both dragon decks and non-dragon decks because given that dragons tend to be late game, a control deck might want to play this because it would actually be a good card in a control matchup where it's not too slow for your Bone Drake to actually trade into something, die, get a random dragon, and then you'll play that random dragon someday. Of course, the deck that currently uses dragons the most is Dragon Priest. Will Dragon Priest find a way to fit Bone Drake in? I think it would at least try. It competes with the Bookworm for the 6th slot, and I think you would ultimately end up running perhaps 3 of them? Maybe 2 Bookworm and a Bone Drake? I think this card can be compared to Azure Drake, which is a 5 mana 4/4 dragon, which was even run in Dragon Priest and run across a lot of other control decks as well. For just 1 more mana, you're getting additional 2/1 in stats. You don't get the card immediately, and the card you get is Death Rattle at a random dragon to your hand, which is both better and worse than drawing a card, because drawing a card is better since your deck tends to be better than random dragons, but in the late game, drawing a random dragon can actually be better than drawing a card, because the random dragon tends to be a late game card. And it doesn't push you into fatigue. If that matters, sometimes it matters. So, some potential here, even in decks that aren't dragon decks, if the matchup is slow enough. I really look forward to Monday's card reveal, where all the cards are going to get revealed on stream and on Blizzard's Facebook. And I look forward to rating all the cards on a 5-star scale system yet again. We won't let the past setbacks of the star system affect us. We'll just continue to rate them as accurately as I can. And don't worry, guys. I know that some of you have said that I might be hedging more. Don't worry, I'll call more than half the cards in the set 1-star cards. During these reviews, I more talk about all the really potential pros and cons. So even on cards that I'm like internally thinking, 1-star card, 1-star card, I'll still mention like, oh hey, Bone Drake, yeah, that could see play in control versus control matchups.